thesis of this video is that maybe humanity isn't something we're born with, it's something we're owed. This is a video essay about slavery and replicants and robots and what do we owe each other. Hi, my name is Jonathan and I love you. Over the next 3 minutes, I'm going to summarize the plot of Blade Runner 2049. So if you've already seen that, I always say I'm going to put timestamps. I don't know how. I was in a bad mood when I wrote this script, so I said, I'm not going to learn, okay? So I'm not gonna, all right? My failed talking stage has a new man. How are you handling that? Poorly, not good, okay? Anyway. It's hot in here. Blade Runner 2049 is a movie totally obsessed with the question, what does it mean to be a human? Set in a world segregated along the lines of a factory-made human-presenting replicant species and organically flesh-born humans. The two groups are almost without meaningful difference. Replicants look and talk and act exactly like humans. They even have artificial memories implanted in them from childhoods that never happened. The movie follows a replicant police officer named Officer KD637, just referred to as Officer K most of the time, and he is a Blade Runner, which means he's a part of a new species of replicant that are more docile, allegedly, than the first batch. What happened was the first batch of replicants rebelled, the humans won and totally genocided them. People like Officer K, Blade Runners, their job is to hunt down the stragglers and retire them, which means to kill them. What kicks off the movie is Officer K goes, kills a straggler, and in the process finds evidence of a replicant mother having given birth. This is a really big deal because up until that point, it was not believed that replicants could reproduce. And that's a big part of how the humans separate themselves from the replicants. So information like this threatens to upset the whole kind of system they have of human dominance over the replicants. So Officer K is tasked with hunting down and killing this replicant baby to keep this information suppressed. And as he leaves his boss's office where he's just gotten these orders, he goes,
I've never retired something that was born before.
What's the difference?
To be born is to have a soul, I guess.
And that's the thesis of this movie. It's Ryan Gosling going on an adventure and struggling with the question of what a human is and is not. This is a spoiler. At one point, he begins to wonder if he is the replicant-born child, and by extension then, if he has a human soul. And in the final twist of the movie, it's revealed to him that he is not the replicant child. He's just a normal replicant. This movie leaves us with questions surrounding the humanity of Officer K, who throughout the movie developed characteristics like selflessness and bravery and empathy, which are all things that we like to think of as both profoundly and distinctly human. So the question the movie leaves us with is Officer K less human than you? And if not, why not? The point of this video is not to evaluate whether built versus born is a valid way to determine humanity. If nothing else, because it's just not a practical question. We don't have factory-made humans yet. But as a human that was born, my knee-jerk response to a human built in a lab is to say, no, that's not a human, that's a robot, and I am inherently better than robots. Second example, The Measure of a Man is the title of a Star Trek episode in which this guy, Commander Maddox, comes aboard the Enterprise with the aim to take apart and dissect this guy, Commander Data, who is an AI-powered robot. Commander Data refuses, understandably, and Commander Maddox makes the case that, well, Commander Data is a robot, he is the property of the Enterprise, and therefore cannot object. The episode puts the autonomy of Commander Data on trial, literally, in a literal sense. I'm not going to get into the arguments that are presented. I do want to highlight one scene, though. Captain Pickard, the captain of the Enterprise, is in the courtroom, and he is the defense for Commander Data. And he nails Commander Maddox down to a definition of sentience. And it's agreed if we can prove that Commander Data is sentient, he should more or less have the rights of a human and be allowed to object to being dissected. The definition that Commander Maddox gives is intelligence, self-awareness, and consciousness. And what Captain Pickard does was he looks at Commander Maddox and he goes,
prove to the court that I am sentient.
And Commander Maddox goes, well, that's absurd. We all know that you're sentient. And Captain Pickard goes, well, how do you know that I'm sentient? And Commander Maddox refers back to his definition of sentience. So Captain Pickard takes Commander Maddox through the first 2 points of his definition, and he proves that Commander Data is intelligent and self-aware. And then he approaches Commander Maddox, points at Captain Data, and he goes,
Now tell me, Commander, what is Data?
What is he? A machine. Is he? Are you sure? Yes. You see, he's met 2 of your 3 criteria for sentience, so what if he meets a 3rd? What is he then?
what is he then? And nobody in the room can answer that question. If Commander Data is sentient and deserves all the rights and treatment of a human, is he a human? And if not, is he non-human in a way that matters? If we treat him like a human and give him the rights of a human, and he talks and acts like a human and has every attribute of a human, can the line between Commander Data and a real flesh and blood born human be anything more than arbitrary? If we treat him like a human, does it really even matter if he's a human or not? And I recognize now that I wrote the same sentence 3 times in the script, but it made sense at the time to phrase it like that. A common thread in both of these examples is that the deciding factor between having the rights and privileges of a human is the sometimes arbitrary status of humanhood. It's easy to see why this differing statuses of human and non-human would be important to people in societies built on oppression justified by humanity's superiority over non-humans. It's harder to smoke out why that question is important to me, a human living in a society free of replicants and Commander Datas. But if we want to find an extremely well-documented case of the status of humanity, or at least full humanity, being used to justify oppression of a non-human or partial human or subhuman group, we unfortunately don't have to look that far back into our shared history. Dred Scott was a slave born in Virginia in the year 1799. He had a number of different owners during his life, but the ones we're going to talk about are John Emerson and his wife, Irene. John Emerson owned Dred Scott and lived in Missouri, which was a slave state. And he was a military man. This was 4 years before the Civil War, so Southerners were still working in the Federal Army. In the year 1839, John Emerson was transferred to Fort Armstrong, which is in Illinois, which is a free state. That's important, so hold on to that. They spent a couple of years there, as well as in the free territory of Wisconsin, where Mr. Scott met and married his wife, Harriet. Years later, John Emerson was transferred, this time to Louisiana, a slave state, and brought the Scott family to live with him the year that followed. In 1843, John died and his wife, Irene, inherited the estate. And in 1846, Mr. Scott attempted to purchase the freedom of himself, his wife, and his daughters at a price of $300. Adjusted for inflation, that's $10,000, which was market price for slaves at the time. Also, a lot of money for a slave to have. This money likely represented decades of extra work and saving with the dream of one day being free people. Irene said no. She had been leasing members of the family out to other slave owners, and I guess the income that came from that she thought was more valuable than $300 and the opportunity to be a good person. Mr. Scott had tried to escape years ago. He had run away, and that had ended horribly for him. And so it makes sense that he would not want to risk his family going through what he went through in a failed escape attempt. So he and his wife, Harriet, filed a pair of suits alleging that because they had been brought to a free state, they should be automatically freed. That tracks. Makes sense. If you cannot have slavery, there actually was precedence for this. Courts had ruled in the favor of slaves before, to the extent that it actually was its own genre of lawsuit. It was called a freedom suit. The court battle went on for 11 years. Decisions by different judges and at different times were made both in the favor of Irene Emerson and the Scott family. The case eventually made it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Irene's defense was pretty simple. It was, Mr. Scott is not a citizen and therefore has no right to file a lawsuit. And on those grounds, this whole case should be thrown out. Supreme Court of the United States reached an official decision on March 6th of 1857. I'm going to read part of that statement. This part is referring to the use of the word citizen in 1787 when the Constitution was written. This is word for word what it said. African Americans had, for more than a century, been regarded as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which a white man was bound to respect, and that African American might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. He was bought and sold and treated as an ordinary article of merchandise and traffic whenever a profit could be made of it. What they told him was, Commander Data, you're a robot and you're not allowed to object. Officer K, you're a replicant. You are less human than us, and we can do whatever we want with you. You have no right that we are bound to respect. Why the thought of a black person being considered fully human and fully deserving of human rights was uncomfortable to slave owners in the year 1857 is pretty easy to see. There was enormous financial incentive in the entire nation, but particularly the South, to viewing African Americans as less human than those of European descent. Why the thought of a machine or a replicant could be considered a human and fully deserving of human rights is a little bit uncomfortable to us nowadays. It isn't harder to figure out, but it is a lot less comfortable to acknowledge. If the only relevance of a line between human and non-human is it's providing moral justification for the exploitation by humans of non-human or subhuman groups, what does that tell us about the root of our anxiety surrounding the possibility of something we see as non-human being called a human? Maybe it tells us that we have more in common with our slave-owning ancestors than we a lot of the times like to imagine. Whether we like it or not, we in the Western world benefit tremendously from the dehumanization of others. In his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, Sir Walter Rodney details an often overlooked aspect of the Industrial Revolution, which is the exploitation of the natural resources found in what they called the Global South. Today we would call it the Third World. He makes the case that the, quote, development of developed countries is due largely to their intentional underdevelopment of underdeveloped countries. Today we can look on the back of almost anything manufactured and you'll see made in China, made in Taiwan, made in Thailand. Why do you think that is? These products are assembled by workers who do not enjoy the same rights that employees in the United States do, and in that way are treated as less human, or at least less deserving of human rights than their Western counterparts are. And I ideologically dislike that, but my behavior around these products would tell you that I am totally fine with it. The uncomfortable fact is that if we were to demand that workers overseas were treated with all the dignity and respect that workers here are, we could expect everything we buy to get a lot more expensive. Put simply, there is enormous financial incentive to the dehumanization of workers overseas. Author and YouTuber John Green made a video several years ago on what it means to be human. This is the important part. If you haven't been paying attention, pay attention now. He posited that humanity is something that each of us is entitled to, but maybe it's not something that each of us necessarily has. Maybe humanity is a gift that we are tasked with giving to those around us. He says that because we really have no way of verifying if the people around us are actually as complex and nuanced as we are, the decision to treat them as though they were will never be more or less than that, a decision. Maybe we're only made human because we believe in each other's humanness. And to dehumanize is to imagine that another is less complex than ourselves. Maybe the anxiety around who is and is not human stems from our responsibility to bestow humanity on all those that we deem to be human. And as that pool grows, with it grows our responsibility. Thanks for watching.